Brother Rohrer. This is his concluding sermon for us with us today, so open your hearts and take him in. This is his last Sunday with us, so God bless you.
Thank you. In the name of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I'll depart a little bit from what I was going to say. That song, every time I hear it, reminds me of the time I was a chaplain in a juvenile correctional institution. And a young man came up to me after the service, and he said, you know, every church I go to, they sing that song. Who was that woman anyway? Amazing grace. Conversation was overheard recently in an assisted living center that went something like this. I've sure gotten old since I've been here. I've had 2 bypass surgeries. I've had a hip replacement. And I have 2 brand new knees. I fought prostate cancer and diabetes. I'm half blind, and I can't hear anything quieter than a jet engine. I take 40 different medicines every single day, and they make me dizzy and winded and subject to blackouts. I have daily bouts of dementia. I have poor circulation. I can hardly feel my hands and feet anymore, and I can't remember if I'm 85 or 92, and I've lost all my friends. But, thank God, I still have my Florida driver's license. If you've ever driven in Florida, you probably understand that better than we don't. Today's gospel story is about a blind beggar who would have fit in well with that assisted living discussion because his complaints were many as well. His main complaint was that he wanted to see again. The story has the usual cast of characters in the gospel miracle stories: Jesus, the 12, and a huge crowd that's hanging around, and the person who's in need who comes to see Jesus. And a blind man named Bartimaeus is caught up in what appears to be a hopeless situation for him. There's a big crowd there. He would like to see Jesus. He's heard all these good things about him, but there's no way he's going to make it through that crowd being blind. And he wants desperately to see again. And somehow he perceives, this is interesting, somehow he perceives that Jesus is the bearer of God's healing. A lot of people who were around Jesus a lot more than this little guy was, didn't see that. And so this whole thing about seeing from a blind man is a very interesting perspective on this. Mark tells us that a sizable crowd had gathered to hear and see Jesus. And so the blind man, in order to be heard, starts making a lot of noise to attract Jesus' attention. And the people around Bartimaeus try to shut him up. But Bartimaeus would not shut up. And the more people tried to shut him up, the louder he got. Son of David, he said, have pity on me. And finally, Jesus hears him and hears all the commotion. And he calls him over and he says, what do you want from me? And Bartimaeus answered, I want to see. And immediately, his sight was restored to him. It's interesting what the blind man in this scripture this morning talks about is quite different than what John and James last week were asking Jesus to do. Remember, they were asking him, can we sit at your right hand and your left hand in your kingdom and have a lot of power and be in charge of a lot of stuff? That's what they wanted. This little guy doesn't want that. He asked to be, not to be seen, but to see. Not as the disciples demanded for honor, but for vision. Not to be superior to ordinary people, but to become ordinary himself. Not to rule over other people, but to join others in their experience of a normal life. That's what Bartimaeus was asking for, and Jesus gave him that immediately. Those of us who read a lot of books just have to stand back when we hear stories like this and notice that folks that we've just told to shut up, the ones that were out argued at various meetings at church or other places, the ones who we've managed to ignore on the street corner. These are the blind folks who somehow see the truth in Jesus when others of us who are more inclined to read books and study theories and that kind of thing don't seem to get it sometimes. So often we make following Jesus and see the purpose of his coming as some kind of complex thing that we have to do all these fancy things with, that we have to be a certain way and do a certain amount of things. And we conclude many times as we start looking at those things, particularly if we mix the Old Testament commandments into this, it really gets confusing, that somehow it's just too hard to do that. And we really can't do it. We're just not able to do it. Bartimaeus shows us the simple truth when he says, I can do it, and then reaches out to Jesus and Jesus helps him do it. If I make enough noise, if I have enough faith, you will see what Jesus is about. There's a lesson that comes to us that makes this point about can't do it very well. It's a lesson that comes from us from a 4th grade school teacher. And it's a pretty amazing story, and I'm going to share that with you today. This story is told to us, and so the narrator, as I read this, is a visiting teaching supervisor who is involved in a project with this teacher. And so this is what he says. Donna's 4th grade classroom looked like many others that I'd seen. Students sat in 5 rows of 6 desks each. Teacher's desk was up in front and faced the students. Bulletin board featured student work. Pretty typical elementary classroom. In most respects, it appeared to be a typical elementary school classroom. And yet something different was going on. You could feel it by walking in that room. There seemed to be an undercurrent of excitement going on there in that what appeared to be normal elementary class. Donna was a veteran small town Michigan school teacher, only 2 years away from retirement. In addition, she was a volunteer who participated in a county-wide development project that I had organized and facilitated, the trainer says. The training focused on language arts ideas that would empower students to feel good about themselves and to take charge of their lives. That's a pretty worthy goal. It wasn't a pretty difficult thing to lay on a teacher. Donna's job was to attend training sessions and implement the concepts that we presented there. My job then as a supervisor was to do visitations and help to sort of encourage the teachers to implement the things that they learned in the special training issues. I walked in the classroom and took an empty chair in the back and watched. All the students were working on a task, filling out a sheet of notebook paper with thoughts and ideas. The 10-year-old student who was sitting closest to me was filling in her page with I can'ts. I can't kick a soccer ball past second base. I can't do long division with more than 3 numbers. I can't get Debbie to like me. Her page was half full and she showed no sign of letting up. She worked with determination and persistence. I walked down the road looking at what the other children were doing, and everyone was writing sentences describing things that they couldn't do. I can't do 10 push-ups. I can't hit the ball over the left field fence. I can't stop and eat only 1 cookie. By the time that activity had engaged my curiosity, and so I decided to chat with the teacher and see what was going on. As I approached her, I noticed that she too was busy writing, and I felt it best when I saw that not to interrupt her. And so I noticed she was writing this: I can't get John's mother to come in for a teacher's conference. I can't get my daughter to put gas in the car. I can't get Alan to use words instead of fists. Thwarted then in my efforts to determine why the students and the teacher were dwelling on the negative kinds of stuff instead of the positive I can statements, I returned to my seat and continued my observations. Students wrote for 10 minutes. Most filled a page, some filled more than a page. Finish the one you're on and don't start a new one, were the instructions Donna used to signal the end of the activity. Students were then instructed to fold their papers in half and bring them up front. When the students reached the front desk, they placed their "I can't" statements in an empty shoebox. When all the students' papers were collected, Donna added hers to the collection. She put the lid on the box, tucked it under her arm, and headed out the door and down the hall. Students followed the teacher, and I followed the students. Halfway down the hall, the procession stopped. Donna entered the custodian's room, rummaged around, and came up with a shovel. Shovel in one hand, shoebox in the other, Donna marched the students out the school into the farthest corner of the playground. There, they began to dig. They were going to bury their "I can'ts." The digging took over 10 minutes because most of the fourth graders wanted to turn with the shovel. When the hole approached 3 feet deep, the digging ended. The box of "I can'ts" was placed in the bottom of the hole and quickly covered with dirt. 31 10 and 11-year-olds stood around the freshly dug gravesite. Each had at least one page full of "I can'ts" in that shoebox, 3 feet under the ground. And so did their teacher. At this point, Donna announced, "Boys and girls, please join hands and bow your heads." The students complied. They quickly formed a circle around the grave, creating a bond with their hands, and they lowered their heads and waited as Donna delivered the eulogy. Friends, we gather today to honor the memory of "I can't." While he was with us on earth, he touched many lives, and almost everyone among us, some more than others. His name, unfortunately, has been spoken in every public building, every school, every city hall, every state capitol, and even in Washington, D.C. We have provided "I can't" with a final resting place and a headstone that contains his epitaph. "I can't" is survived by his brothers and sisters. "I will," "I can," and "I'm going to do it right away." They're not quite as well known as their famous relative. They're certainly not as strong and powerful as he was yet. Perhaps someday, with your help, they will make an even bigger mark on the world. May "I can't" rest in peace, and may everyone present pick up their lives and move forward in his absence. Amen. As I listened to that eulogy, I realized that these students would never forget that day. The activity was symbolic and a metaphor for life. It was straight, right brain experience, and it would stick with them in their conscious mind forever. Writing "I can'ts," burying them, and hearing the eulogy was a major effort on the part of that teacher. And she wasn't done yet. At the conclusion of her eulogy, she turned the students around and marched them back into the classroom and held a wake. They celebrated the passing of "I can't" with cookies and popcorn and fruit juice. Donna cut out a big tombstone from butcher paper and wrote these words on it: "I can't" at the top, and R.I.P. in the middle, and the date at the bottom. The paper tombstone hung in Donna's classroom for the remainder of that year. On those rare occasions when a student forgot and said "I can't," Donna simply pointed to the sign, and the student chose to rephrase their statement in a different way. I wasn't one of Donna's students. She was one of mine. Yet that day I learned an endearing lesson from her. And now, years later, whenever I hear the phrase "I can't do it," I see images of that fourth grade class in that funeral. And like the students, I remember that "I can't" is dead. After his sight was restored, Bartimaeus followed Jesus to Jerusalem, became a follower. and went with him through those last days of his life. And Bartimaeus offers us the opportunity to make that same journey. He's a strong advocate for the attitude that I can do it with God's help. As I observe what Holy Cross is accomplishing in these days, I see lots of we can do it attitude here. In my experience, that has not always been the case here. And so I remind you, as you continue to seek God's will and to build this church into the center of hope for this community, that you always remember that I can't is dead.